Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. Right there. This session will be recorded as all others are. They'll be archived to YouTube for the purposes of saving the world one conversation at a time and going back in time and holding Ryan accountable for everything that he says, does, and everything we hear in the background based on your family being in a small hotel room during spring training. So that'll be great. Any questions, anything anybody wants clarity on, please feel free to do so politely. By using the chat box, or just simply unmuting yourself and asking a question in a timely fashion. This is session 29 of Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable. A really special guest this evening. We go back a long time, and I was going back through this historically, just trying to remember exactly when I saw you last. But let me go through your bio, because it's an impressive one, and then we'll jump into some of the history, and then where you're at now, and how you got there, and all the other good things. Ryan Crotin's our guest tonight. He currently serves as the Director of Performance Integration for the Los Angeles Angels. I still can't get over the name changes and remember which one's right, but I think that's right. Los Angeles Angels of Major League Baseball. He's spent over 3.5 years with the Angels, including a previous position of player performance coordinator. He has an interdisciplinary PhD in biomechanics and exercise physiology and is a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He was a postdoctoral researcher in human performance and the Penn Throwing Clinic coordinator at the University of Pennsylvania. He was an MLB assistant strength coach, a roving coordinator for the Baltimore Orioles between 2012 and 2014. He spent over 6 years, close to 7 years, at the University of Buffalo as a biomechanist and exercise physiologist, and a volunteer assistant baseball and strength coach while there. Go UB, you Buff. And he was also a member of player development staff with the St. Louis Cardinals back in 2008 to 2009. Certifications include Selective Functional Movement Assessment Level 1, USA Weightlifting Level 1, and as mentioned, he is a CSCS and many other things. A father, a husband, and gracious with your time as always, man. Good to see you. It's been a while.
That is a mouthful, and that was amazing.
Right?
That I can't believe it. It's almost like we were roommates that whole time. You recited that perfectly and saved me the time. So,
there you go.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys reaching out to me and for me to be able to be on with you. I know we've gone back a long time in our baseball days, and we've had conversations over the past few years. It's amazing. The one thing that I really love about baseball, it's the relationships you make. We all finish playing the game at some point, but the people who you meet in the sport, they last for an eternity. So I'm grateful. I'm glad to be on this with you.
Hey man, grateful to have you. And it's like, well, it looks like no time has passed for you. You probably look better than you did back in the day. I'm getting older and grayer and balder and fatter over here, but I'm just watching you constantly evolve into this beast of a human being going through school. So Ryan and I, just to give everybody a little bit of background, we ended up playing together. I think we were a couple years apart in terms of playing, and you're always on another organization, and then transferred over to the organization where I was, or I ended up catching up to you in years, or playing up a year or something like that. And I always remember Ryan was teaching everybody mechanics of hitting down at Stan Wadlow Park in the bullpen. And I remember just listening to this guy back in the day, and he was teaching about I think it was the back foot squishing a bug, and I think it was the top. I wasn't a hitter, so I was paying attention, but not really. But
Yeah.
and the top hand punching the troll in front of you, right? Was that the one?
Yeah.
Something like this. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
evolved since then into a PhD, but probably hasn't changed that much, right? Baseball's pretty standard. Doesn't change too much.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing that's changed with the mechanics is that back foot no longer engages with the ground. So when, people who are on this call that they're watching baseball, it's amazing if you look at the hitter's feet that there's so much force going into the lead leg, which is called the block leg, that the back foot actually picks up. So when I had gone through as a player, I was always told that it's important to keep balanced and weight evenly distributed between both legs, which is not the way that we teach hitting. In this day and age, you're going for broke into that lead leg, and if that foot comes off the ground, it comes off the ground. It just means that you're transferring energy into your lead leg. So the hand path that you talked about, that's still right.
Okay, perfect.
You still, we talk about working above the baseball, not below the baseball. So if you don't punch the troll, you end up kind of uppercutting the troll, and then you create a big J in your swing. And that's something that's been consistent throughout time is that punch the troll position.
Right, and then a whole bunch of other technical terms that have crept in over the years. Launch angles and all kinds of other things that we're teaching to 3-year-olds now, and just seeing how far they can hit a freaking T-ball. But anyway, everybody's a big leaguer until they're a big leaguer. But that's awesome, man. And so I just recalled that story, and then I was going back through and since announcing, like I was going to have you on as a guest, and you were gracious enough to make some time while there at Spring Training 2.0. A few of the boys reached out, and they're like, man, it's gonna be such a good conversation. They're not on here, but hopefully they'll pick it up on YouTube as well. There's a bunch of practitioners on here, newish, some that have been on here for a while, and a bunch of people have been picking this up on YouTube. So your insight into all of this stuff, even so far, has been fantastic. We crossed paths, I think, last, at least formally in working days, was New York Penn League, huh? You remember this? In Batavia, New York. That was a long time ago. So I was an athletic trainer with the Jays in the short season, and Ryan was a strength coach, right? You were a strength coach with Batavia at the time.
Yeah.
So way back.
It was a while ago. Yeah.
right. So anyway, times have changed. Things have changed. You're with the Angels now. You've been there for a while. Do you want to just kind of walk us through? Obviously, baseball has been a part of your life for a long time, but just kind of walk us through your career path and sort of if you ever had to divert, or it was very straight and linear, or how you got to where you're at.
Yeah. So, I'd always been connected with strength training in baseball. So my best friend, whose father was my first coach, had an uncle who donated a bench press to my best friend. We were about 11, maybe 12 years old. We had no clue what to do with it. But his uncle came and he showed us how to bench press. And it was interesting to me because I knew I was strong. At the age of 6, I could piggyback my father. So my dad could actually sit on my back at 6 years old, and I could walk him around the driveway. And
I gotta try that one tomorrow.
Yeah, my neighbors, thought it was pretty hilarious seeing the 6-year-old kid, able to scoot around with his dad on his back. And so I knew I was strong, but I didn't actually have a quantified sense of that until the day I actually bench pressed. So he taught me, and I remember the uncle was just kind of shaking his head when he saw that I could do about 1.5 times my body weight as a 12-year-old kid, and being an inexperienced lifter.
Yeah.
So, that to me, I kind of felt a connection to training, and I knew that, unfortunately my genetics couldn't take me to a level that I had hoped. So I knew I had to train for it. And that got me really interested. I remember getting into physical education at the OAC level. At that time, we had 13 years of education in Ontario. And in that year, it was mostly on exercise science theory, a lot of functional anatomy, a lot of communication about exercise physiology. We talked about VO2 max and some of these other aspects and contraction types. And I thought to myself, this is what I wanted to study in school. I wanted to have some element of this as part of my academics. And so I ended up getting a scholarship to the University of Maine in kinesiology. And there it was really interesting because it had a lot of features from motor learning, which motor learning is a really big facet of coaching in this particular game, especially teaching by constraints, constraint-led approach, adjusting boundaries and those kinds of things. So it was very interesting to me. But then also mixing in the exercise physiology standpoint of how, there's interrelated systems of biochemistry and biomechanics and some of these other areas. So I knew I was on the right academic career path for me, but I always wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. Like that, the academics were secondary in my dream, but they were obviously primary in my habits.
Right.
And I ended up getting a master's degree in physical education. And after that, I was lost. I ended up going to play independent league baseball all over the world. I still wanted to play. I was in Germany and Australia and was paid nicely and really enjoyed it. And I thought, I want to make a go at this and try to be a free agent. And it didn't happen. And I came home to my family, and they wanted me to become a doctor. So I had stacks and stacks of MCAT books to dive through in terms of preparing myself for medical school.
Right.
And at the same time, I started a small business training volleyball players. I didn't even have baseball players, even though that's like my vernacular. I didn't have anybody who played baseball in the group. They were all female volleyball players. And I absolutely loved it. And when I was coming home late at night, so I'd go there probably around 1:30, 2 in the afternoon to set up for programming, and I'd come home for around 11:30 at night. I realized that I was really fastened to the point of reading the NSCA's Strength and Conditioning Journal, research journal.
Yeah.
And I kept kind of tossing between, am I going to keep studying for this MCAT, or am I going to gravitate towards a career that is more academic based in sports science and exercise sciences? So I came at an impasse. I said to my mom, I'm going to really disappoint you here, but I know I don't want to be a doctor. I don't have an interest in being a physician. I need to be more with athletes. I need to be more on a science level. And I think I want to do a PhD. And so my mom said, where are you going to study? And I remember I sent out a lot of emails, and the PhD game is not so much where you go, it's who you work with.
Yep.
And you got to really sell yourself. And the fact that I was a master's in physical education made it really challenging to land a position with some of the heavy hitters, like William Kramer, Vladimir Zatsiorsky. These are like big names in strength and conditioning science. And they wouldn't have it. So I said to my mom, I said, let's just drive to the University of Buffalo. Let's just see what they offer. And I said, maybe I can coach there too. And we drove one afternoon. We were going to stay overnight.
Yeah.
And I ended up going to the school. And as I met with the administrative official, she told me, it's interesting that you came here because we just fired a TA. We just fired. I guess he might have hit on a student, got in trouble, and this job was open. So she said, why don't you give me your resume? And I wasn't even in school. We just had a conversation, and she just liked what I had to say, I guess. So I gave the resume, and she introduced me to some professors, and they said, have you written your GRE? And I said, no, I haven't. And they said, well, you need to do that immediately. And there is a potential we'll find a place for you. So that was done. So I knew, okay, I had an in somewhere, but I still wanted to coach. So the next place I went was a strength and conditioning facility. And in there was a group of huge strength coaches, big, like Nate Harvey with Elite FTS. He was a coach at the time. There were some monsters in that room, and they're all crowded around this guy in his late 50s, early 60s, without sleeves, wearing a UB shirt. And that was Buddy Morris. I don't know if you know the name Buddy Morris, but he's the director of strength and conditioning, or I think it's player preparation, something like that for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yep.
He said to me, you know, can I help you? And I said, you know, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was wondering if you're looking for interns this coming academic year. And he said, why do you ask? I said, well, I'm hopefully going to study my doctoral education here in exercise science. And he laughed. And he said, you know what? He said, I'm going to take you on because I think you're going to need to learn something. And he was correct in the sense that exercise science programs at the time were heavily focused on cardiorespiratory fitness, mm-hmm. and very, very deficient in training theory, and particularly periodization with weight training. It was almost like maybe 4 lectures that I had. And if I didn't have that experience with Buddy, I don't think I would be where I am today. And at the same time, I left his office, went to the baseball office, and the head baseball coach was fired the day I was there. So that means the assistant coach got moved to the head coach, and everybody got moved up, and they had a vacated grad assistant position. So I went on one day. I basically made an entry with the school. I had a baseball coaching job. I had a strength coaching gig that I can be involved in, and I did that for a number of years. But on the academic side, I entered a program that was more nutritional biochemistry based. I wanted to see how vitamin C could protect ligaments. So basically like collagen synthesis, because mm-hmm. of what happens with UCL sprains. That I figured, you know, is it possible when an athlete has like a grade 1 or a low grade sprain of their ulnar collateral ligament, could it be remediated partly with nutrition, being vitamin C? So, you know, because it's something that's accessible to everybody. And at the time, the conservative approaches like PRP injections, those kinds of things weren't really well known. So I felt this would be a really interesting area to study. And I spent about a week and realized this is not for me. We were injecting snake venom into rats. We were letting their tissues necrotize. We were then hitting them with heavy doses of vitamin C. And I just thought, I hate killing animals this way. And
that way, just in general, maybe.
Yeah. I don't want to kill animals in general, but I realized this is going to be a really tough course of study for me, especially when I was so excited about coaching and, you know, the other things I was doing. So through my TA-ship, a professor came in he's a Canadian guy from the University of Delaware, and he brought in all these cameras. And he said, look, I need to find a TA that's going to help me oversee labs and biomechanics. And for me, I was like, I had a little bit of biomechanics background from my kinesiology degree. It was a long time ago, but I asked if I could do it. And then, you know, after the first 3 classes, the first 3 labs that I taught, one was on the vertical jump, and we looked at something called the impulse momentum theory and calculating the vertical jump from force plate data. And I was just like, this is awesome. This is coaching. And I remember talking to him, and I said, do you think you could throw a ball in here? And he said to me, he said, you know what? He's like, yeah, I think you could. You can get a pitching study going here. He asked me who I was working with, and I said I was working with a different professor. And he said, well, that could be a problem because this isn't related to your current scope of your dissertation.
Right.
And he went to the chair and he offered himself to be my PhD advisor. And he talked to my current advisor at the time, and they made a relationship that they said, if he gets an interdisciplinary PhD in exercise science with a concentration in exercise physiology and biomechanics, everything will be good to go, but he can't have one without the other. So that kind of led me on the path of studying fatigue and its impact on biochemistry, particularly stress hormones and blood analytes, as well as movement compensation. So looking at a paradigm for which fatigue will change how an athlete moves.
Yep.
And that's what took me almost 7 years to graduate. I also had to work in between there to pay for my subjects because it wasn't a funded lab. So the Israel Baseball League in 2007 started, and they were looking for players that played independent league that could get away and play for a summer season. And I sent in video, and I remember I sent in a CV. So they never had a CV before from a player, you know, like an academic CV.
Yeah.
And so it kind of resonated with the director of player development and player personnel there. And he brought me on. You know, he said, yeah, we'll pay you to play, to come to Israel and play for the summer. And I'm just very grateful that I got the right pitch in the first game that was really well attended, and it was televised. And I hit the first home run in the league's history, the only year that they ever had professional baseball in Israel.
Yeah.
And it got a lot of attention. And afterwards, this director of player development and personnel sat down and talked to me and asked me about my education. And this guy ended up becoming the GM of the Baltimore Orioles later on. So I got an inbox, is Dan Duquette, and I got an inbox message in my LinkedIn when I had to come home and do my dissertation writing from my parents' house because my TA ship ran out. I couldn't live in the country anymore. So he just said, hey, I think I got a job for you. And that kind of began a bigger world of baseball for me. And, you know, it's led me to a postdoc experience that I came out of baseball to take on. And I enjoyed it, but I really was missing coaching and being around athletes daily. And out of the blue, I had an interview with the Los Angeles Angels that they were looking for a sports science person who had a strength and conditioning background and could potentially scout. And that's what got me here.
Wow. Yeah, just an amazing sort of like, I mean, we look at it and like, you can't even make this stuff up in terms of like how it lined up. And we talk about, like, you know, some people say coincidental timing, but you set yourself up in the right way with doing, you know, following your passion, obviously, some innate drivers within you to get all of these things done, and really following, you know, where your heart was at, and really just chasing down what you wanted to do, not what you felt somebody else wanted you to do, or what you felt might be next just because it was supposed to be next. It's an amazing story. And the only thing that I would say would make it better is if when they asked you to write your GREs, if they just said, here, do it right here on this computer, and then you passed it at 100%, which I don't doubt that you didn't anyway. But, you know, if it had been right there that day, it would have just made that weekend a freaking,
no, I think it's important. I want the viewers that could potentially see this to know that I was a horrible standardized test taker. I had a very low SAT.
Yeah.
And I just met the minimum requirement on the GRE. So the thing is if you can get in the door, if you can get that minimum requirement, the world's your oyster, because you'll get through the other stuff if you persevere and you're passionate about it.
Yeah, I just had this conversation with one of the founders of athletic therapy in Canada just over the phone, and we're going to have her on later, but she was talking about that exact thing. Is like, if a door is open, you better go through it. Because if you don't, you'll be kicking yourself years down the road. You never know what it could have been. But if you go through it, you're going to find out exactly what was through that door, and you're going to get to wherever you want to go if you take it and jump in. So it brings me sort of to a lot of different areas that I want to take this just in talking to you and hearing your story. But characteristics of successful people and influencers in your life. And I mean, you're, without even knowing it, you know, you're one of those people for me who follow you, follow your career path, your education. But the obvious things that stand out just in listening to your story and taking the time to be here, you know, drive, pursuit of passion, resiliency, not really taking no for an answer, humble and polite, and just like very well spoken. You know, you are what you are, and you're on the surface, and there's a lot of depth to you, but there's no fluff, you know what I mean? And you're just very to the point, and it's amazing to hear, and it's amazing to catch up with you over this little Zoom cast, and for everybody else to have exposure to you as a person and a student and a strength coach as well. So again, man, I really appreciate you being on. This is huge. All of this stuff really impacts everybody as we try to connect during these times and beyond, to sort of see, you know, help mold people and shape people and just direct. So Yeah, I don't know. Well, you talked about fatigue, and
Yep.
Glenn Fleissig is obviously a big name in
Sure.
biomechanics as well at ASMI.
Sure.
Just listened to a podcast with him and Eric Cressy, talking about anything and everything, and really, like, he's been published a bunch of times, and the one study that he relates to the most, or says has had the most impact, and they've had a lot of impact, is pitch count, and talking about fatigue in the amateur athlete. So
Mm-hmm.
really interesting that you bring that up, and I just listened to this, and just that, there's a lot of things that go on in sports science and biomechanics and technological advancement, and then a lot of that gets watered down, or the content gets delivered before the context, or people take things out of context. How do you guys do that without giving away your secrets with the Angels? How do you sort of keep the athlete at the center? Well, there's all of this data being generated, like, how do you make it personal for athletes?
Yeah, I think what's important is you have to understand the personality of your athletes. I think one of the best things that I've ever read, and I definitely recommend it for everybody that's on this call, is Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew. I think it's important to first kind of understand your athlete in terms of matching what you can give them. So some of our athletes, like, there's a few that have what I would call health anxiety. They're
Yep.
usually the guys that hang out in the weight room or the training room. They're constantly needing to do something, and things don't normally feel good, right? And so as an athletic therapist, I think the people on this call should really understand their language has power. So when you talk to an athlete and you say things to an athlete like this feels tight, you know, um, that kind of thing can take an athlete and go in a really challenging direction, where now they could end up becoming too mobile because they're working on something every day because it's been mentioned.
Yep.
And if they lack the end range strength, they then expose themselves to injury. So as far as the athletes, like those technical guys, those health anxious guys, I usually don't report any data. I don't show them reports or visualizations or comparative information. I just indicate the programming. For example, today, I did some shoulder strength testing on some of our pitchers to look at imbalances using a very expensive piece of dynamometry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a new player that we had, and he was very inquisitive about, what does the data mean? What does this look like for me? Is this normal, right? And I think in that instant, I could feel like this guy seems like an overly concerned athlete.
Yep.
And I had mentioned to him, I said that everything is individual, and that we can't truly compare your data to another athlete's data. And we can't say that this data is going to impact your career as a major league player. All we can tell is that we use this data to individualize your arm care. This helps us program, and that you should be able to trust that we're taking this data to give you what you need. And it kind of just ended that conversation there, that I felt if I got into the granular details that, your internal rotation strength was 10.1 kilograms and your external rotation strength was, I can't remember, it might've been 18 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a really off ratio there, that I think it could have sparked anxiety in this athlete.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which you don't want to do. So it's the same thing with biomechanics data, whether you guys are looking at functional strength data, range of motion data, you're giving insights to an athlete about their bodies. And if they're really internal, that can be dangerous. Okay. You might find that there's the guys that are really technical. They feel they're confident athletes. They're not hanging out in the weight room, fiddling around. Things don't feel, they feel great to them. They follow along with your programming. They don't go to you and say, I don't want to do this because I don't think my shoulder blades protract, or whatever is told to you. They can handle a little bit more of the graphical visualization. Like, here are your trend lines over time, and this is where we want to get to, where they're not going to take a downward spike and internalize it that I am doomed. Injury is looming. So for people who are responsible, this could be a problem. If you are a straight sports scientist and you don't have the coaching acumen and you don't relate with athletes that way and you don't see them in that way, it could be a catastrophic nightmare in terms of how you deliver data. So I personally believe it's so important for people on the medical team, the strength and conditioning team, your nutritionist, your psychologist, your sports scientists to all work together to understand the data and communicate amongst each other to determine how it gets delivered. So my monitoring process has 3 prongs, actually a 4th. Observation. So we basically identify what are the right data points we want to look at. Mm-hmm. Communication, which is the huge thing. Like what we're talking about is what are the communication strategies that have to be met, one, between us to understand what we're talking about thoroughly, and 2, how do we deliver it to athletes? Yep. The next is implementation. So we have to have a process by how we can continually take the data in terms of putting in a prescribed plan. But the 4th level is evaluation. So for you as part of that integrated team, you need to have the parameters to say, when do we need to pivot? It's just like a business. If you're not getting the value added metrics that you want, you have to be able to, as the entrepreneur, you have to be able to determine what's the next direction I'm going to take with this athlete, with my team, with my organization, with these coaches and practitioners. So you need those 4 levels, I think, to have a really effective process to improve performance and reduce injury.
100%. And you touch on so many great things, and it's kind of been a nice common theme here. We've had, multiple practitioners that are athletic therapists, chiropractors, MDs, orthopedic surgeons, and not one of them has stepped sort of away from that athlete centric or that human centric model of like, you need to know who's in front of you first and foremost, because if you don't, then you're missing a huge piece of the pie, regardless of if it's a surgery that's standard or a rehab that you've done 16 times before. And then that integrative approach of knowing who's on the team and where you're, acknowledging value where value lies, and how that's going to work together to really build a model of strength for the athletes, right? And as a team, yet inter and intra personnel communication, which is fantastic to hear you say that that's happening in Major League Baseball and with that organization who's very much at the top end in terms of progressive performance, and looking at that as a whole for the organization. So that's amazing to hear you say that. You touched on a couple other things. We go back to sort of like the tech, right? And I know that like biomarkers and like markers, like sticky markers that we're putting on people and then having them throw a baseball. There's now technology coming out that is markerless technology. Where do you think that's going to take sort of things in baseball in the future? I mean, do you think that there's going to be a move to have like these cameras in the stadium that you guys are going to set up specific to your athletes so you can understand them in a 3-dimensional manner? Or do you think there's still a place for like the old eyeball tests? Like the greatest scouts in baseball, most of them are over 60 years old. Maybe not the greatest, but a lot of them are lifers, and they catch a lot of things with their eye that even a camera can't capture. So do you think there's a nice balance, or it's going to tip the scales?
Well, there are a lot of teams that are taking on these markerless motion capture systems. Yeah. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a world where you blend both of them. There are subjective things that people see in video that are really effective. And some of the things like we wouldn't be able to see from a camera. So if you're scouting, you might see things in terms of how this athlete interrelates with their teammates, or you might see how what's the pitchability of this athlete as far as the resilience of after a 2-run homer off of them, and what do they do with the next batter, the first pitch. Right. There's certain things like they can see in terms of the personality characteristics of their craft. We have some of those guys that are just unbelievable what they see. I mean, they see things like they scan pitchers from ground to fingertip, as you should, just like a biomechanical reporting process would. Mm-hmm. But what's going to happen is I think the artificial intelligence of the markerless motion capture systems are going to become almost as good as marker-based systems, where you're actually putting markers over bony landmarks to identify joints. And it's not going to be, you know, in the next year or so, but, you know, as more people are using these systems and feeding it data, the machine learning approach from being able to train the AI intelligence systems, they're going to be able to identify small changes. You know, if you take one of these systems and you have like a floating error, so let's just say, you know, if there's sometimes it might be off by 5 degrees when you look at a joint measure, or other times it might be off by 10 degrees, because there could be inconsistencies in the way that they're teaching the training set for the AI.
Yeah.
It's very problematic. So you kind of have to understand the bandwidth of, you know, what are you going to consider to be actionable for you, you know? So, but I do believe it's the way that the baseball is going to go. I think at the college level, and most definitely at the amateur levels, that, you know, this type of technology will be brought to a smartphone. And, you know, that, and when it hits to that level, and it can be at an accurate level, I think you're going to see that people like us, strength coaches, you know, medical practitioners, physical therapists, athletic trainers, people in the allied performance industries, they're going to start using it more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to become more intuitive. You see, biomechanics, when I first started, it was like, it was sort of like this esoteric physics and biology, you know, mashed together, and all these like long differential equations and, you know, challenging concepts, where I think biomechanics is going to become very commercialized and digestible. And I think when that happens in our industry, I do think we're going to see a reduction in injuries, because that is the name of the game.
Yep.
And when we're all speaking from a common perspective and a common language, we'll be able to make decisions. So, for example, people that are in the marker-based labs, you know, they have different marker sets. Like, you might put markers on the body differently than I do from my lab. And so our computations, particularly of force, they might not be consistent. So let's say I know Glenn Fleisig. I'm really grateful that I do know him and the time he gives me. But we had different marker sets. You know, what I had at the University of Buffalo was not similar to his.
Right.
And so the problem is, when we try to agree upon a quantified number or range of what could be considered, you know, a high stress delivery, it's very difficult, you know, because we cannot we cannot make those relationships because we calculated them differently. And the other thing too is, as we understand biomechanics, I think we need to get more internal.
Yep.
And understand tissues. And there's a lot of great researchers that are out there. I just talked to one. He's a PhD candidate. I think he just graduated. If you guys get a chance to look him up, his name's Chris Curran, and he studied at Eastern Carolina University, and he had just an unbelievable comprehensive research project where I'm hoping he publishes his data soon. That is incredibly impactful. Because he spared nothing from the internal world and the external load world, and mashed them together to give you a really good perspective of, you know, what the body can handle, like in reality, not cadaver based,
right,
in pitching.
Yeah. Some just amazing stuff coming out, and I'll throw all these resources up on the YouTube channel as well in the discussion section. So if you're writing these down frantically, I'll make sure that we go back and throw these up. You touched on so many great people, and I'm just going to bring you back to Mr. Bartholomew's read. You know, conscious coaching is a big one. I blurred through it, and then I came back around to reading it again. And I read something this morning, and I'm just going to read it just so everybody hears it. But this was just in one of his chapters, and I just pulled it up because I'm a bit of a geek. I just take pictures of what I'm reading so that I can go back to certain elements. But he was talking about a British behavioral researcher, Daniel Nettle, who provides a tremendous example when discussing the famed Galapagos finches. Nettle elucidates that the Galapagos finches with small beaks do well when the climate is favorable, as they can quickly peck many seeds. However, when drought comes, natural selection favors finches with large beaks, so as to better penetrate the barren soil. The Darwinian example is the inspiration behind the old survival of the fittest mantra that is often misinterpreted by many who think that the fittest refers to physical strength, when in reality it references an organism's ability to be adaptable to its surroundings. And I read that and I was just like, man, bam, that's just like one of those things that we sometimes leave out and we sometimes forget to come back around to when we're treating or when we're coaching or when we're talking to another human being. But that adaptability factor, based very much in technology in your world, I'm sure, but also in that human element of having access to the roster, having access to the personnel that you have, the coaches that you have access to, and making that communication part really gives you access to find out how to tweak and manage, adaptability per person, right? Like we can blanket cookie cutter program for however we want, but when we're not adaptable enough in our own professional skill set, the athlete is the one that ends up losing out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you just talked about that, and I had just taken this picture like this morning. So I was like, all right, he's just talking the same language. Let's jump in here. So that's amazing, man. Listen, you're currently in LA, right? And that's where you guys are at the stadium and doing spring training 2.0, I think we're calling it.
Yeah. Our I have to say our front office is amazing.
Yeah.
Our GM is like an incredibly forward-thinking, real person. Real person, a guy you can have a conversation with.
Yep.
Loves the performance component of what we offer.
Mm-hmm.
He looks at us as like the pit crew, keeping the cars on the road, and gives us the right finances needed for education, technology,
Great way to look at it.
speakers,
Amazing.
those kinds of things. And I feel like they've done such a good job as far as how to organize our spring training 2.0 process by having 2 locations. So we have it organized at this Angels Stadium.
Yep.
And we also had a college site in Long Beach, and just a seamless way of how the day works. Very efficient. You're coming in, you're getting screened. You're not hanging around. You're getting to your work. Players are very respectful of the boundaries. So, like our front office and our manager Joe Madden, some of our key players had really laid the foundation of how we need to interact in this new normal. We need to do things to protect ourselves as not just teammates, but as family,
yep.
as Angels family, because if I look after you, you look after me. And in that case, it lowers our rates of infectious disease. And it's really interesting because I'm finishing a publication with a group that studies Japanese injuries and MLB injuries, and the highest injury listings, the most frequent are illnesses, mm-hmm. internal illnesses.
Okay.
They occupy the most reports. And I do feel that at this current moment, what we've had to deal with COVID-19, I believe the strategies that we have in place and the behaviors that are going to come from this event are going to improve our health statistics, because prior to, I think we were more casual with wiping down equipment, with wearing protective masks, gloves, hand washing and hygiene. I think that this is all going to come out in a positive place for health in baseball. So that's just something that we've been experiencing here during this interim of our programs.
Yeah, and maybe even like the world in general, right? Like even you look
Yeah.
at sort of some of the comorbidities, and you look at a lot of things that are being published from the health and performance world, and it's like metabolic rate and cardiorespiratory systems that you talked about as the sort of the forerunner back in the days of biomechanics, and PhD studies were very much in that realm. We know what is good and what is not, but it sometimes falls by the wayside, and it's awful to have to lean on something like this to make a change. But at the same time, we sometimes can just make that lemonade out of the lemons, and start making some changes. So you talk about like the literal stuff and the stuff in baseball, but for humanity as a whole, I think some of those applications are certainly beneficial. So really, really good stuff. That's amazing, and great insight. Joe Madden being there is obviously like a whole nother world. I just, the media covers him fairly well when he was with the Rays and doing some stuff and with the Cubs as well, when he was doing, with the players, and some of the stuff that he does to just sort of recenter them and allow them to be themselves and just kind of go about their day. But also you talk about spring training and spring training 2.0, and you just kind of knock out some of the redundancy with this as well, right? Get in, get out, and spring training is a freaking grind. And you want to talk about, we know that fatigue contributes to injury, yet spring training days go from 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. for minor leaguers at least, and it's the big league guys that sort of get cut loose. So maybe this will change the whole thing, and just kind of like trim the fat a little bit, and like get in, get out, move in pods, move in like they're doing that with school and considering that for school. So that's great to hear that there's a lot of forward thinking going on in baseball. And I don't know, I look forward to watching some baseball for sure, and getting caught up that way, but maybe not in the stadium anytime soon, but certainly watching it happen, and the developments. And you know what, like I think with all the resources that go into baseball and pro sports, maybe you set the precedent, right? There's going to be a lot of data gathered from athletes going back to activity that the rest of the world can use, Yeah. Cool. Great stuff. Japanese Major League Baseball, before we get to this, and you're looking at like the crossover of injuries,
Yep.
and anecdotally, the guys who have never been injured playing in Japan, and then they come to the major leagues, and then they get injured, they blow out their UCL. Are they doing something different? Is this something that's being looked into? Is it something that's maybe more than anecdotal, or is it just like, it's just because there's only a few that are being broadcast on?
Well, I'm starting to, like, I have a meeting after this with the Japanese research group that we're looking at this data, but there are some differences. There's some marked differences between MLB and the NPB, the Nippon Professional Baseball League. And one of the things is that the pitching rotations are different. So if you're a pitcher in the NPB, you're pitching virtually every seventh day. And typically, I need to confirm this, but I believe every Monday is an off day in NPB. I believe that's what they have listed. They also have much fewer athletes in their minor league system. Right. So they're kind of, the ratio, I think, of medical officials, strength officials to player, I think could be potentially better. If you're an affiliate, you got a lot of athletes to deal with. And sometimes you don't get to have your hands on all of them, because athletes typically, they go in to see someone in the sports medicine field when something isn't feeling well. Right. The maintenance aspect is at times not as encouraged or celebrated as it is in Japan. A lot more, I think there's a little bit more hands-on approach to the preventative aspect that's not reactive. Yep. What else can I tell you between those two leagues? The travel, right? Yep. So you don't have, such shifts in time zones or long flights that you have to battle, opposed to what we have here in the MLB that can really kind of influence, I think, that the health data. So, some of those conditional differences can make us maybe look at this data and say, are there things from the NPB that we should maybe adapt? And then also from them, is there a way in which they better prepare, their players for MLB rigors, right?
For the transition. Yep.
Another thing that I found interesting is that the surface, when it comes to pitchers, the surface that they pitch on is different. So for us in the US, in North America, in pro baseball, it's clay, right? It's a very hard surface. And when it's in Japan, they use something that's almost like a volcanic soil. It's very soft, it's powdery.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a recent study, there's been 2 known studies that looked at Japanese biomechanics versus American biomechanics in pitchers. One was a college study, and another was a professional subgroup. And they found that the consistency between them is that the Japanese pitchers actually had a softer lead knee. So they didn't block the same way that an American pitcher would, in terms of having a more extended knee through ball release. And part of that could be, now we have a change in surface and potentially a change in mechanics, right?
Yeah.
And so and nobody's really studied the transition or change in biomechanics going between leagues within a pitcher.
Yeah.
So that's a big deficit in the data, that we may find that there, the surface alone, changing ground reaction force profiles, are enough to create kinetic chain changes that can increase load to a shoulder, elbow in a Japanese player that comes here. So there's a lot of interesting things between the 2 leagues that may, cause an athlete, once they come here, to be at a higher risk.
Yeah, cool. Very, very cool. And like, I geek out on this stuff. I removed from the baseball world, but very much love it and just love talking about this stuff. And then I pull up like a 2018 article that says stride length, the impact on propulsion, embracing ground reaction force and overhand throwing. And there's this guy named Ryan Crotin who's the co-author on that one. So, I mean, you're ahead of the game. And I think very much there's the surface, the stride length, the biomechanics, and the surface, the interplay there, and like the change of all of these things: adrenal fatigue, circadian rhythm fatigue, scheduling, throwing, days of throwing. All of these things come back around to your central piece of biochemistry, right? Biochemistry and stress hormones and movement compensation through fatigue. Right? Like, these are all things that we know as if there's one thing we know in performance and in rehab scenarios, regardless amateur or pro, is that fatigue is a factor when it comes to injury. So that's a nice little tie-in to everything that you've done. And man, I look forward to reading. I think so. If this one goes to publication, that'll be what, like 20 or something. I think your profile said 19 publications. You lost count. I'll just pump your tires some more.
There's a few that are coming. I'm just very grateful, because there are a lot of people that say, okay, we need somebody who has expertise in this area. And through some of my professional networks, they're just like, hey, do you want to jump on a paper with me and do a little writing and kind of look at our results? And again, I work for an unbelievable organization where they really are supportive of promoting health through research in baseball. Like, there's a few of us that are involved in publications. Our head physical therapist, and he's actually got the title of director of player performance. He researches hamstring injuries. He's like one of the foremost experts in MLB on hamstring injuries. And so, we get a lot of support that way, and we connect with a lot of people that way, that I'm just fortunate that, there are people that have asked for me to be involved in these things. I have another paper coming out with my professor that's going to be really cool, very new for the pitching world. It's all on knee and ankle biomechanics in pitchers, and how stride length is affecting those things.
Yeah.
So that just was submitted. We have a conditional acceptance.
Yep.
So for people on the call, I'm sure there's probably some that have gone through the peer review process. It's really anxiety driven, because you don't know who's reading it. They're attacking everything that you're saying. It's just really, really rigorous, but it took a while to get this one through. I mean, it took 3 revisions for them to really say, okay, this is where we want it. But it's going to be really interesting, because like ground reaction force, the foot is obviously the joints that are closest to the ground, but the next propulsive joint is your ankle.
Right.
And so a lot of people in the medical community, even the athletes, they might not spend a lot of time understanding their feet and their ankle. as far as what that means to develop friction and what that means to develop the right force vectors. And athletes, so athletes that I believe evert the foot early, they really they're losing efficiency, because they're losing friction. So some athletes, like pitchers, sometimes hook the rubber, where the inside cleats are actually off the rubber and the outside cleats are actually on the rubber, so that they feel they have a pulling sensation off the rubber of the mound. And what can happen is, if the ankle, if they have feet that I believe pronate easily, they're going to get into eversion early. And when you have eversion like that, you lose friction. And if you lose friction, you lose force. And if you lose force from your lower body, what happens?
Yeah.
You're going to have to pick it up somewhere else. And generally that's at the shoulder and elbow. Yeah. So there's all these different relationships that I think are unforeseen that we're going to get into in the world of pitching biomechanics.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to get on those. So just start reading on those ones. I know that the ankle dorsiflexion has become so sexy in the performance world. It almost gets beat. It almost falls on deaf ears, but it makes sense if you're a ground-based athlete, and that is virtually every athlete, except the ones that are water or air-based. But ground-based athlete, if you're not understanding what's happening there, and I don't mean like consciously understand, but you're not at least internally understanding what's happening at the most distal point and the propulsionary joint of interaction of the ground and your foot ankle, then yeah, you're at a bit of a loss. So like we ask athletes to do certain things, pick up I don't know, I just think of standard rehab with like shin splints when I go back to school, and they're like, just pick up some marbles or pick up a towel, and it's the most it turns into a useless exercise, but it can be the most beneficial exercise in a knee rehab, in a hip rehab, if it's done with intent and it's done correctly, right? To like get that distal connection and utilize, because the toes and the feet and the ankle are going to be used in every step you take and everything else you do. So really, really cool. And there's a lot of good stuff out there and more to come, obviously, through you. That's amazing, man. I can't wait to read it. So I'll stay on that one. Not that you don't have enough to do, but I promised you, I promised you 9:30 and it's 9:27. So I don't know if we're going to have any room. This is just time flying.
Well, I'm okay,
okay?
Because I pushed back this meeting for a little bit because I felt that there may be questions. I didn't know the format, if people on the call want to pose questions to me or
there really is no format. We just kind of wing it. Okay. It's like going to Wadlow Park, and you just kind of like, whoever shows up, you just roll with the roster, and you might play center field today if what's his name's not here. So yeah, if there are any questions for Ryan, please feel free to type them in the chat box.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm just going to scroll over. I kind of like to get to know some of the people on this call, and kind of how they've experienced baseball or throwing athletes, and I'm really open to the questions that could be posed. I hope I can answer them.
Yeah, I know there's definitely one or two that have spent some time in baseball for sure. Others that work in swimming and overhead athletes and things like this, where there is definitely some crossover.
Sure.
Propulsion of an object versus propulsion of body, that changes some things. So there might be some good questions there. So anybody who has anything, just feel free to drop them in the box here or just unmute. There's a colleague who just moved from Toronto back to Montreal who spent a lot of time in baseball. And he was asking me, he's not typing here, maybe he is, I don't know, maybe he's not even there because I don't know, but he was asking me about amateur baseball and how to sort of make an impact in amateur baseball. And I think a lot of this stuff, how do you prove your worth? Well, you go in and you talk, he's there. How do you prove your worth in baseball, or not necessarily prove your worth, but how do you make inroads in a sport that's very traditional and is sort of slow to the uptake in Canada, at least, to have an ATC or CATC, in Canada, Canadian Athletic Therapist, or a certified athletic therapist in Canada, latch on or sort of like lead the way in terms of supporting athletes and supporting teams, right?
Yeah, I think, the only way we're going to get ahead of injuries in baseball is with education and outreach. And, a lot of what happens too at the amateur level is there's a significant pressure to specialize in sport. And along with specialization, right, we know that throwing a ball thousands and thousands of times from the time you're 6 years old and
Yeah.
doing very little else is going to create some significant asymmetries. And so I think to make an impact in amateur baseball, I think it comes from putting yourself out there and trying to interrelate with travel teams, or baseball leagues, and giving them insight and information in terms of how they can do a better job protecting the health of those athletes.
Yep.
And I think that builds a name because, you're making yourself visible to a group of athletes and parents that might not otherwise know that you're there, right? I think one of the stigmas with athletic therapy is that it's very, like, the thought process is it's reactionary. Like, if I go to an athletic therapist, that means I have a problem.
Yeah.
Something's hurt, right? Where, trying to think of like what my GM says about, the pit crew. It's like, if we started to look at our medical community in that way,
Yep.
where I can go there when I feel good to, get my spark plugs changed or put a little oil in the engine.
Or some nice rims. Put some nice rims on
nice
there.
rims. Yeah. That's gonna keep you on the road.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really important. I would just encourage everybody who's on this call to, think about how can I create outreach and educate people. There are lots of athletes. I mean, sports is a bazillion-dollar business. Amateur sports, a bazillion-dollar business. There's so many athletes, so many teams, so many parents that are begging for information and, a personal touch. Hey, I want to come in and I want to talk to your athletes about shoulder health, or I want to teach them about what they can do to improve scapulohumeral rhythm and have just a whole, a half hour, 45 minutes of giving them insights. That goes a long way, and there's strength coaches that are assigned to a lot of these teams that I think too can improve their understanding of prevention by having someone come in from the medical community. There's a differential diagnosis process that, the people on this call have that strength coaches they're not exposed to unless they're really reading and they're having focused time with somebody in the field. They won't have, that understanding of what's called regional interdependence, where, one area that's got a problem is the root cause and the manifestation in another is just the result, for, how someone in the medical field thinks is, phenomenal because they're treating the root cause before the actual presence of injury. And those kinds of things are important, and I think that's how you make an impact, through your ability to educate, and wanting to do that is important.
Yeah. Awesome insight, and making, I always sort of think of us as a conduit between sort of the science and the performance, or science and the athlete, or science and the parent, or science and the coach, where you can take a lot of the semi-undigestible material that's out there, digest it, chew it down, do all the things that you need to do, and then produce something to parents or coaches or athletes that is relatable, right? And so you look at some of these things, you listen to podcasts, but you also gain the context by reading the studies for yourself, and knowing that how you want to contextualize that article is also a bias. But at the same time, like, there's a lot of good material out there, a lot of good people that are willing to help with this kind of thing. And I just think, like, there's a lot of good stuff out there on pitch counts. Dr. Andrews and ASMI obviously have, I think it's called Smart Pitch or Smart
Pitch. Yeah. With MLB.
Yeah. Smart Pitch with MLB. And then they have, a lot of good articles in terms of, like, just some numbers that you could throw at people. Like, I think it's 100 innings or something like that. It just turned out to be a really round number in one of the articles they wrote that had the most statistical significance in terms of, like, if a child, a developing athlete, reaches 100 innings in a season, they are more susceptible to injury than anybody else. So as pitcher specific, but just going through the data and presenting some of that, doesn't have to be your material. If you can relate it and sort of bring that personal experience and knowledge, it's amazing. That's a great insight. Thoughts on sidearm pitchers from a biomechanics injury potential perspective is a question that just came in. Obviously, like arm angle and things like that. And what you have at that one.
There's been a few studies on sidearm pitchers, and they are very unique in the sense that most overhand pitchers, when they hit at foot contact, their torso is closed. So that has shown that it reduces actual load on the shoulder and elbow. And when you get to a sidearm pitcher, the sidearm pitcher typically has an open chest at foot contact. And so what happens is the arm gets extended away, and there's a little bit more of a disconnect between the forward progression of the torso and kind of the outstretched arm moving around that relationship. What I would say for sidearm pitchers, they typically don't throw as hard. So, velocity is one of the main attributes for injury. Essentially, if you're throwing at higher velocity, especially if you're bigger, you got heavier masses, you're going to have higher forces. Now, when it comes to a sidearm pitcher, they typically don't throw as hard. But, getting the understanding of biomechanics, and this is a great question, is how to customize arm care. So if you know that there's going to be more elbow distraction forces, more tensile stress to the medial elbow for a sidearm pitcher, that's something that you need to consider in their arm care, that you should have an elbow stabilization type of process, right? And a lot of overhand medical performance specialists really focus on the scapula and the rotator cuff, where, the forearm work is typically taken care of in grip during deadlifting or pull-ups or other gross motor activities, where the real important ones are the off-axis ones, like pronation, supination, deviation. These are things that, I think they need to realize. So it's important. It's a great question, as far as, some of the different needs between the two.
Yeah. Great insight. Great question. Just thinking sort of outside the box. And one thing for me when I was in, still in baseball specifically was kind of just meeting every day, going over what we're doing, what we're not doing, and then seeing injuries go up. And as injuries go up, that would take me aside. Let me stay on my current thought. Waiting until surgery happens to do a surgical rehab protocol, instead of implementing it beforehand and being a little bit more progressive in terms of what we're thinking and what we're doing. Right. So yeah, really, really good stuff there. And you also talk about, so making it customizable. And then again, that comes back to that adaptability component. And I'm just about to take on something I've never done before, but I'm going to coach some little tykes in baseball, just a couple times a week, and really looking forward to it. But they keep sending me little video tidbits of what they're teaching kids and how they're teaching kids to throw. And it's all well intentioned, but every time I see a child throw right now in this, in the little video tidbits, and I'll generalize to say that's probably uniform across the board, is as soon as they release the ball, it's almost that they recoil. So they don't really allow the arm and like almost like this follow through. Whereas if I'm teaching a child to throw, I want as much decelerative, range as possible, probably, and almost like do a barrel roll when you release the ball, like just go until you fall over. I don't know, just interesting stuff when you watch sort of like the development and how much implication there is to how we're teaching at the younger levels. And then you get them and you have Mike Trout and, Ohtani, and you have Albert Pujols on the roster, and these guys that have been doing it forever. And it's a whole different ball game, pun intended, at that point. And to customize and also relate to the fact that they've been doing it for a long time. So you're not going to be able to overhaul everything all at once even if you feel it's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're talking about the starting level of baseball, the grassroots. So I did write a paper on using a baseball bat as an implement to improve forearm strength. It's in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Journal. Yep. And I think I would love for that kind of thing to take hold in the amateur community, and using their gloves. Like, as soon as these athletes start throwing, there has to be some kind of preventative training. Yep. They can't do something at such high velocities without strength work. And typically kids will have a glove. They can put a ball in it. It'll be about a little over a pound. They'll have a bat. They can use the bat almost like what we call an elbow mojo, where there's weight on one side and there's a handle. Yep. And they can utilize these tools and start, an arm strength process from an early age.
Yep.
And that kind of thing, we just have to be creative as far as how do we get the training to a young athlete, and how do we ingrain this habit so that they know that they need to do it? One, it probably becomes an external pressure of the parent originally, but eventually it becomes intrinsic for the athlete to say, this is like brushing my teeth. This is just what I do to be able to compete in this game. And you know what? It's going to help me throw harder. And I think another thing that I did with kids, as far as improving deceleration qualities, is you have to have them move at speed. So usually what happens when kids start throwing, they kind of get into a T position, and it's like step and throw, right? Step and throw, step and throw. What I would do with these young kids is I'd say, hold a ball, run like it's a javelin, and try to throw it. Run as fast as you can and try to throw it. And it's going to look goofy at the beginning, but they're going to teach themselves to throw with their body and less with their arm, and building the coordination pattern in that way, I think, is really helpful for kids. And that might help that kind of like pie. I'm going to stop throwing it, and it's like I end the catapult here, which can be much more stressful to a developing joint.
Yeah, and then even like running after the ball, go get that ball, and then and there's your recovery before the next time you pick up a ball to throw it.
Race the other kids to see who can throw the ball the furthest. And race them to get to your ball. You can make it fun with baseball. I mean, that's awesome.
You just designed tomorrow's practice, so I appreciate that. And
javelin contest.
Yeah. But stay in your lane and stay 6 feet apart, and that's the next part of it. You talk about off-axis stuff and pronation and supination, and how the RTC and scapular mechanics and scapulohumeral rhythm are very that's what overhead athletes should be training. I just thought of it as you're talking about developing grip strength in the gym through deadlifting and gripping and snatch and like whatever other things people are doing with weights in their hand. Like, do you ever deadlift with like just the throwing fingers?
We talked about
a lot of strain. You have to.
There's certain things, like there's a lot of research that talks about these two fingers. Right, being related to basically the muscle groups that overlay the UCL. Finger strength being able to improve the stability of the medial elbow.
Right.
And a lot of what happens with grip is your thumb is wrapped around it, right? And so what happens is a lot of the muscles of the thumb, they kind of shield some of the force that's needed by the fingers. And so doing things by having a thumb wrapped over with more of a hook grip, not really using your thumb in gripping can help improve like your finger dexterity and your finger strength. And so those are some adjustments that can be done, in training. But I do think that, you should have some element of what to do with your fingers as far as flexion to gain stability, because when we hold a ball, right, even when it could just be ball squeezes. You're developing some isometric tension that can be held at the elbow joint. So I think that's a great question.
Yeah, and then the next part, like I just happen to have baseballs sitting behind me, but
great.
You just so you're holding the ball and even just like squeezes on a firm ball or even like a stress ball, and then just adding simple pronation to flexion at the same time.
For sure.
So you're mimicking stuff, and that's stuff that can be done in the dugout as a 6-year-old, and you're not strength and conditioning. You're not going to, break their growth plates and all the boo-boo that's out there about strength and conditioning when it's done the wrong way with young kids. So some really cool stuff that we can implement at the younger levels and make it fun, right? Like you just have a ball and you can draw a little face. But anyway, I'm just thinking about tomorrow's plan.
Sure. Sure.
All right, last question, and then I'm going to let you get out of here. How does a pitcher's biomechanics change, I think, after having Tommy John surgery, if they do? And do players tend to have a harder time getting those mechanics or proper biomechanics back for pitching after the surgery?
This is the $1 million question.
There it is.
Okay. So nobody really knows, because there's not a lot of prospective research that's been done to be able to identify the baseline of the athlete when they come in, then the injury presence, and then what happens after. So this question, unfortunately, I can't answer very well, because there hasn't been a lot of studies to do that. And there was one study to look at the differences between injured pitchers and in healthy pitchers. And the problem was that the injured pitchers had been rehabilitated. So what they found in this study, it was Fleisig's study, it was a good study, but they didn't find anything different.
Right.
They virtually found, and it was different, like with a slap injury, depending on how things are anchored, the athlete's going to lose external rotation. That happens. It happens in a good amount of cases where they kind of figure out ways to kind of work around that lack of range. But as far as a Tommy John surgery, nobody really knows, what do they carry the ball differently? Do they supinate less? Like if you take your arm back into external rotation, if you have a pronated grip on the ball and you take it back, your bicep kind of gets in the way. Right. And if you turn your hand supinated, you can lay the arm back further. Like, I don't know, does something change with getting into maximal external rotation? Does the athlete become more pronated, or does he become more supinated in his position based on potentially this injury? Because we know supination opens up the elbow joint more. So this question is awesome. It's one that I wish I could answer. I would love to, if Major League Baseball decided that all teams would coordinate together and just determine, pool all this data and understand where the injuries stem at the beginning. We may have a little bit closer connection to understanding how to prevent, these injuries, or, how to go through the RTP process to regain what the athlete had.
Yep.
Right. A lot of times, I think when, potentially all the people on this call, they may not have access to a biomechanics lab. They might not have, the right equipment to be able to evaluate, the movement of their athletes. So what could potentially happen is that the athlete that has gone in for this injury has not made any change in the way they deliver, and they may have this pathomechanical approach that they had pre-existing maintained because it's a learned motor action because of this injury. So love this question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer it, but it's awesome. It gets my wheels spinning all the time. Like, what could be to really keep everybody healthy, and it's hard. It's hard in pro baseball because, teaming up with other teams, it means there's sharing of data.
Right.
And that's also, quite frightening for a lot of teams that want to keep those things close to their chest.
Yep.
So there may be in the future where, these 3D markerless motion capture systems just say, maybe they give you a discounted rate if you offer your data to research. Like, that might have to come to that because, baseball injuries are incredibly expensive, especially for a pitcher that might be, $20+ million a year. You got sunk costs and salary, and it may affect ticket sales because people want to come to see this pitcher pitch, and they get kind of put off that he's not going to be there.
Right.
There's all sorts of things that could stem from an injury, and not to mention, thinking of the athlete, the emotional cost that they have to go through and thinking, I'm falling behind. Will I be the same? How come people are not, I'm not with my team the same way? Teammates check in on me, but I'm not there grinding with them. Like, there is a psychological cost of injury that, we could maybe stave off for a lot of these guys that play.
Yep. Another 3-hour conversation. I think we could jump in and just stay on here until it's time to go, because I feel like I'm just writing a whole bunch of stuff down because you and me are going to have a lot of conversations in the future about this once you get out of spring training and the season, whatever that looks like. But those are all areas that we all need to consider and consider quite heavily, in making decisions. And you talk about this being a question that you can't answer. I think that's the gist of it, and that makes just putting that out there, it's not an answerable question at this point, and understanding that is really nice because I go back to the last guest I had on, who's a PhD. She studies motor control. She does a bunch of stuff with concussion, and when it comes down to it, like, we over science things to the point that sometimes that we actually don't know as much as what's out there. What we think we know, we know very little about, and this is a similar sort of strain.
For sure.
the top guy in the biomechanics world. And
I'm not the top guy.
Performance
Glenn
well,
Fleissig,
listen, you're the top guy on this conversation, and you're the top guy. You're the top guy, and you're captaining my ship for sure. So you can just keep steering and just make sure we don't hit anything massive that we can sink. But I think you've kept us afloat for a good hour and 20 minutes tonight. And you're in spring training. You have your family there. I'll let you go, and really appreciate your time, Ryan, being here. I know everybody else really appreciates this. This is some massive insight into baseball, into professionalism, and just in the way listening to you speak and how passionate you are and humble you are with all of this. This has been fantastic. I'll reach out again off camera, off site here, and wish you the best for spring training and all the best to the family and everybody. And I'll make sure that anybody who reaches out on my end knows you're okay, and you're just making things happen. That's amazing, man.
Awesome. If there are other questions that come up, if they can funnel through you, you can get me in a lot of different ways and get the answers out to the people you need. Definitely open to that, and I thank everybody for listening to me for over an hour. So
yeah, it flies, man.
Yeah, I just hope everybody's well and healthy. Their families are good, and together we'll get through this. And I think a new normal is coming down the pipeline. And I think if we can all grasp that and appreciate that, life is still life. We still can have stress. We can still have joy. We can still enjoy baseball. We're all going to be in a good place.
That's it, man. Very, very well said. This has been Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable, session 29 with Ryan Crotin. Again, Ryan, really appreciate everybody who's on the call tonight and everybody who picks us up in the future. We're all indebted to you and grateful that you could take the time out. So thank you very much. And I'll wish you good night.
Yeah. Thank you to you. Take care.
All right, man. Good night.
Okay.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.